Lord, you have given the Bible to be the revelation of your great love for us and of your power and will to save us. Grant that our study of it might not be made in vain by the callousness or the carelessness of our hearts, but that we might wisely hear your words and learn and inwardly digest them, so that we might become mature, convinced, and convincing followers of Christ Jesus. Amen. I again want to invite you to enter into this dialogue with Jesus and his message. And at the end, I will ask if anyone has some additional comments or thoughts that they want to add to it, or even a word of testimony of how this particular passage has impacted your own life or your own thinking. We had a wonderful Thanksgiving in San Diego. Did you have a surprising Thanksgiving? Anybody have a Thanksgiving surprise? Everything was pretty predictable. Tom ended up going to Prescott. You know, that was a surprise. He thought Karen was going to have to work, but she got canceled, and so they went to family in Prescott. And anybody else have a surprise? We had Thanksgiving dinner at Denny's, and that was fun. I mean, we could each choose what we wanted to have, but that was it was the only thing we could get into at that point in time, and we don't mind going to Denny's. That was a fun deal. We met up with our two sons in San Diego, and our daughter and her husband couldn't make it down because they were with his family in Turlock, but we still had a great time with the guys. And in preparation for that, Cheryl and I decided that because of our schedule restrictions, that it would be best to fly this time to get to San Diego. You know, usually we drive to go to San Diego, but this time we decided it worked better to fly. And as we often do when we fly, we book a Southwest Airlines flight. And we are big Southwest Airlines fans because of the pricing and the general reliability, of course. The downside, though, is cattle call. Open seating on Southwest Airlines. They board you in groups, and then when you get on the plane, then you choose your seats. So in order to get into an early boarding group, which is what you always want to do in order to get a good seat, you either have to pay an additional fee, or you have to do early check-in, which you can start to do 24 hours ahead of the flight. And since we like to play the frugal game a lot, we do the latter. And of course that means that you have to be on top of it, because if you forget or if you fail to go online right at 24 hours before the scheduled departure, you will get stuck in the losers group. And if you are stuck in the losers group, that means that you end up sitting between two really large people for the entirety of the flight. And so I knew that it was my duty to do the check-in for us. I had to check in at precisely 10:10 on Wednesday morning, because I knew this was supposed to happen, because I woke up in the middle of the night with this eating at me saying, oh yeah, 10:10, got to check in, don't forget Southwest Airlines. Middle of the night I woke up with this impeding into my consciousness. And then on Wednesday morning when I got out of bed, Cheryl had already gone out for a walk, and there on the counter was a note that she left for me, remember to check in, and apparently she had had the same revelation in the middle of the night. So before English Club on Wednesday morning, I went to the southwest.com check-in page and entered all of the names and confirmation number, and then so I left it on the computer. Then I went from there to McDonald's, where we have the class, and we had a great English conversation club that morning. But then right at 9:30, instead of lingering to chat after class, instead of going to the post office after class, instead of going to pick up coffee grounds at Starbucks after the class, I excused myself and I rode my bike directly home. And I got there with 20 minutes to spare, And I pulled up the website, my information was still tacked in there, and then I sat there and I watched the clock, waiting for 10:10. So, because at 10:10, then you can click the button, and after that you print out your boarding passes. And I admit it, I did do a test run at 10:05, just to see if my information would go through. I didn't expect that it would, and indeed, it did not go through at 10:05. So I watched the clock some more, and then precisely as it turned to 10:10, I clicked that button on the computer, and woohoo! I checked in. And the check-in went through without a hitch. And we got positions 2 and 3 in the B group. I was on top of it, and I still got into the B group instead of the A group. The A group is the best group to get in there. And I was prepared, and I still got into the B group. It's not the best, but especially considering how precise I had been in calculating and figuring this out. But it was good enough for good seats. So, the beginning of the B group is good enough for good seats. And then after that, you start doing the packing routine before you fly. Because I figured I better do it now while I'm thinking of it. So I took the pocket tools from my backpack and left them on the counter. And I took my my mini knife off of the keychain and left it on the counter. And then I started finding suitcases and on and on. And it amazes me how much energy, how much focus is required to travel by air these days. You cannot be a casual flyer. It just doesn't make any sense. There's a sign in some airports that I've seen where they divide up in the TSA. They say casual flyers. Then the other one says professional flyers. Something like that. People fly all the time. There's no such thing as a casual flyer anymore. You can't be casual about flying. You have to plan every little thing out when you're flying, and then you have to stick with the plan, and you have to stay with all the deadlines and get through all the security and time, and avoid any distractions that could derail your state of readiness as you're preparing to fly. In Advent, we focus on the importance of readiness. Not for air travel, or even for the holiday, but for the coming of Christ. And Jesus is pretty insistent that people need to be focused, they need to be ready, they need to be prepared, they need to be undistracted, they need to be alert, they need to stay alert, according to verse 42. Therefore, stay alert. Matthew 24:42. Verse 44. Therefore, you should be prepared, because the human one will come at a time you don't know. Now, with air travel, at least theoretically, you know what time to check in. They tell you need to check in 24 hours ahead of time, or you need to be at the airport 2 hours ahead of the flight. But with coming of the Son of Man, or the other translation of that is the human one, which is Jesus' favorite title for himself. With the coming of the human one, we don't know when it's going to be. There's no schedule that's printed up there for you to track and follow. So it's even more important then that you stay alert and that you stay prepared. Otherwise, you lose focus. Now, it's actually very significant that each time that Jesus refers to himself as the Son of Man, or that each time that he refers to himself as the Son of Man, or the human one, which is the Common English Bible rendering of it, a very nice rendering of it, because that's exactly what this term Son of Man means. It means the real man. It means the man that is the most fully human of all human beings that there possibly are. Thus, he is the one who is the most uniquely qualified to rule. That's packed into that title. As the human one, the Son of Man, it means the one who who is qualified to rule over the world beyond, above any other human being. Now, it's actually a reference back to a phrase in Daniel. Anybody want to guess what chapter?
7.
Daniel 7, 13 to 14 in the Old Testament, where the prophet says, "As I continued to watch this night vision of mine, I suddenly saw one like a human being coming with the heavenly clouds. He came to the Ancient One and was presented before him. Rule, glory, and kingship were given to him. All peoples, nations, and languages will serve him. His rule is an everlasting one. It will never pass away. His kingship is indestructible." All packed into that term, human one. So Jesus is talking about himself, and he's saying that he is the ultimate human, that he is the Superman. He is the Übermensch, that Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher, the crazy philosopher, but he got this part right. The Übermensch that Nietzsche imagined. And as the human one, then thus, therefore, he is the one who is uniquely qualified to rule above and beyond any other possible ruler that there could be out there. He is coming to establish his regime. He is coming to establish his reign. So you better watch out. You better not cry. You better not pout. I'm telling you why. Jesus is coming. You need to be ready, or you will find yourself in trouble with the king. Avoid judgment is what's being said here. Avoid judgment by preparing yourself for the coming king and for his kingdom. Don't be caught by surprise. But nobody, verse 36, nobody knows when that day or hour will come. Not the heavenly angels and not the Son. Only the Father knows. As it was in the time of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the human one. In those days before the flood, people were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage until the day Noah entered the ark. That is, everything was business as usual. They didn't know, verse 39, they didn't know what was happening until the flood came and swept them all away. The coming of the human one will be like that. At that time, there will be 2 men in the field. One will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill. One will be taken and the other left. The reference is back then to the story of Noah in verse 39 here, when the godless are swept away in the flood. So it will be business as usual, as it was in Noah's day. But then suddenly, as it was in Noah's day, surprise, surprise, as it was in Noah's day, the unprepared and the godless will be swept away, as it was in Noah's day. And only the prepared and only the godly who had actually been working alongside these unprepared and ungodly people, they will be the ones who remain to be a part of the kingdom that the human one will establish. Now I realize that some people have read this passage in a slightly different way, and they try to tie it in with 1 Thessalonians 4, 16 to 17. Let me read it for you. "This is because the Lord himself will come down from heaven with the signal of a shout by the head angel and a blast on God's trumpet. First, those who are dead in Christ will rise. Then we who are living and still around will be taken up together with them in the clouds to meet with the Lord in the air. That way we will always be with the Lord." So what they're equating this to in Matthew 24 is that they're being taken up into the air with the Lord in 1 Thessalonians 4. For a number of reasons, though, which we do not have time to dive into deeply here, including a little more developed reading of this Thessalonians passage. It's not exactly totally clear on the surface what's being said there. And as I've argued in another context, when we see God's goal as removing us from the planet, it subtly affects the way that we think about the planet. You know, as though it's disposable. God's going to wipe it out, therefore we're being removed from it. So we begin to think about the world differently, and it becomes more and more difficult to take seriously the mandates of Genesis 1 and 2 in the creation accounts, where we are put in charge of taking care of the world, that God, being stewards of the creation. I think it's a psychological barrier there. But you're certainly welcome to disagree with me. But I would suggest that it's probably best to read these verses in Matthew 26, 40 to 41, primarily in light of the two verses that precede it, the immediate context, as opposed to grabbing a context out of 1 Thessalonians. That is, just as, so it renders something like this: just as in the days of Noah, those who are caught by surprise, that is, unprepared, will be whisked away to judgment and unable to participate in the coming rule of the human one. So as I see it, the desired outcome is to be left behind. I know the books said, the desired outcome is to not be left behind, but if you look at the context and see what's going on here, the desired outcome is to be left behind in order to participate in Jesus' coming kingdom. But even if you do not read Matthew 26 in quite the same way that I read Matthew 26, and you see being taken away, caught up in the clouds in the sky as the preferred exit strategy, the more fundamental point that Jesus is making is absolutely still the same, right? Be prepared. Be ready. Whether you're coming or staying. I mean, whether it's either way it's around, the point is still the same. Be prepared, be ready. Now, this whole readiness thing, preparedness thing, is a little more complicated than preparing to fly on an airplane to San Diego. You see, when it comes to flying, you at least know when the plane is supposed to leave. But when it comes to the advent of the Son of Man, it's a little bit more of a mystery. So if you look at verse 36, but nobody knows when that day or hour will come, not the heavenly angels and not the Son, only the Father knows. That's a very interesting passage. Even though Jesus is God, he has put his knowledge on hold so that he could experience the fullness of being human and be the truly human one. Then in verses 42 to 44, therefore stay alert. You don't know what day the Lord is coming, but you understand that if the head of the house knew at what time the thief would come, he would keep alert and wouldn't allow the thief to break into his house. Therefore, you also should be prepared, because the human one will come at a time that you don't know. He's saying, I'm like a thief, coming to break in. And not in the sense that he's coming to steal, but he's like a thief coming to break in terms of the unexpectedness of it. Jesus is coming back, but the timing is a total mystery. And anyone who spells out the details in a chart or even in a wonderful novel is absolutely yanking your chain. And by nature, this whole thing, this whole episode of history is mysterious. Only the Father knows. Only the Father knows. That's the point of it all. Yes, there are people making millions of dollars plotting out possible end-time scenarios and selling their books, and they've been doing it for decades and decades of doing this. But the bottom line is that only the Father knows. Only the Father knows. And I admit that I get a little bit on the cynical side about this. I kind of sometimes actually get annoyed that there are people who are going into a lot of details on things that even Jesus himself felt unqualified to spell out. And of which God the Father preferred to speak only in general terms. But is it not arrogance that we, come up with all the details? We got the secret key, we figured it all out. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be interested in the return of Jesus. Quite to the contrary. If we're going to be prepared, we need to be interested in it. But we need to be aware of anything that appears too precise. Anything that appears too precise is off the track. We know when the airlines are scheduled to leave. But when it comes to the coming of the Son of Man, we don't know anything more than some very general information. We knew yesterday that the plane out of San Diego was coming because they said, it's just down there, pretty soon it's going to land, and we don't know when the plane is coming. And what we do know is very general, and the generalness of it is in some very apocalyptic language or mystery language that was used to kind of stir people's imaginations. It is more like a wild comic book in terms of the type of language that it is, the craziness with beasts and fire, and it's just extreme kinds of language to express something that's going on. Earlier in chapter 24, there's some of that kind of language. There's also mention of persecution and wars and rumors of wars and betrayal and hate and desecration of the holy place. And Jesus says, these are all signs of the coming. But they are all general enough signs that each generation can read them as being applicable to their own time. And every generation has read those and say, oh, we're living in the end. This is it. Jesus is coming. Look, there's a war and there's a... we are to be at the highest state of preparedness, but the problem is that we don't have an exact ETA. It's as though we know that we're supposed to show up at the airport and we are supposed to be ready to board the plane, but we haven't been told when the plane leaves. And this makes preparedness for the coming to be even more challenging. If I know that I am supposed to do something at 10:10 on Wednesday morning, and if I'm reminded enough, I can usually get there, and I can usually follow that plan, and I can carry it out, and I plan all my other time accordingly to fit into that time certain. But if I don't know what it is, then I'm kind of hang loose about it. And I tend to be very hang loose and get there whenever I get around to it. The problem is that even though we don't have a schedule of the return of Jesus, God it's not a hang loose kind of a deal. Except from our end of things. The way we're seeing it is kind of hang loose because we can't see the schedule, but it doesn't mean there isn't a schedule. It doesn't mean that God is being hang loose. It just means that we don't know what it is. God has a definite time frame that He's working with, so He's not hang loose. But He's also not filling us in on all the details. Which in some ways is good, because if we had all the details, we would probably jump the gun, or we would never get anything else done. We would be so distracted by all the details of it. I remember as a kid that I was very fascinated to hear the story of how my uncle and my aunt told my cousins that they were going to go to Disneyland. My uncle had told them that someday they would get to go to Disneyland, but he never got specific about it. So one morning when my cousins woke up, their mother appeared at the door in their room and announced, "Let's get going. We are going to Disneyland today." And then she proceeded to pull their packed suitcases out from under their beds. And in a matter of minutes, before the cousins could really process it, they were in the car and they were off to the airport to catch a plane to go to Disneyland, which is the next best thing to heaven if you are a kid. My Uncle Bill and my Aunt Carol Ann did not want to tell the kids too soon about their coming trip, except in a general way, because they knew that my cousins would be so enamored with this thing, they would be unbearable around the house. They wouldn't be able to do anything or get anything done. So they made it into a surprise. The coming of Jesus is like that, except he wants us to always have our suitcases packed. You know, you maybe don't know when, but you should always have your suitcase packed, or you should be ready to go into action. And that's not easy. And that's not easy because some of us are procrastinators. And we don't like to get stuff done unless we are under last-minute pressure. How many of you are procrastinators? Last-minute pressure makes it happen. And some of us just don't like the idea of having to be ready for something when we've got a lot of other things on our plates, right? You know, well, I'll get to it when I get to it, you know, but there's these other things, you know, I got to make a living and all this other stuff that has, you know, I got to pay off these bills, and I'll get to it when I get to it. And then why should I keep my suitcase packed if I'm going to want to use some of the stuff in there for other things right now? Why should I, you know, be constantly taking stuff in and out of this, you know, changing clothes out of the suitcase? Why should I be that level of ready if it means more work for me? And some of us just have a hard time believing that it's really going to happen. Why should I pack? Why should I be ready? It's been 2,000 years, right? And in case you haven't noticed, the Son of Man hasn't come yet. He's probably not coming, at least in my lifetime. So why should I go to all the effort and work to be ready for the coming of the Son of Man when he's not going to be coming in my lifetime? I mean, if you look at the odds and the calculation, you put it into the algorithm, then that starts to get precision oriented, which I think is one of the reasons why you say don't do that. But these are the issues that keep us from being prepared. And this is one reason that we do the Advent season every year. It's kind of like the executive who puts it on his calendar that every January, in the second week of every January, he is going to spend that week reviewing his company goals. He knows that if he does not put it on the calendar, it will slip through the cracks and he will never get around to doing the assessment that he needs to do. So he intentionally puts it on the calendar that in the second week of January, every single year, he reviews the company goals to see if they are on track. And that's what Advent is. Advent is an intentional calendar reminder to do an annual checkup to see just how prepared you are for the coming of Jesus. In some ways, the very act of checking puts us into the preparedness mode and puts us into an alert mindset. It doesn't matter how many times you've done this routine or how well you know the story. It's imperative that you enter into this time of checking. Is there stuff in my life that will slow me down at the security check, at the security screening? Are there new issues that will keep me from flying? Have I added some things into my suitcase that are not supposed to be there? Could they become a barrier to me making it through the process? There are some of us who have never asked this question of themselves or ourselves. Perhaps you're just figuring out that Christ has a claim on your life, and you're trying to decide whether you want to give up everything else to follow Him. And exactly what does that mean anyway? You're sorting through all of that. Well, welcome to the club. I mean, we're all struggling with the same thing on a very daily basis. The major difference is that we've decided that we want to be with Jesus no matter what. We may flub things up, but it's like flying. The people who miss the planes who miss getting a good boarding pass are usually those who don't take the process seriously, who are way too hang loose about the whole thing. There was a guy at the airport yesterday. They kept calling his name. He was supposed to be on the plane to Dallas. They kept calling his name. Your plane is leaving. You checked in a half hour ago, but you need to be at the gate now. And he just, who knows what happened to that guy who had checked in a half hour before. Between that half hour and the time he was supposed to be getting on the plane, he had gotten lost. He was just too hang loose about this stuff. Verse 37. When the Son of Man returns, it will be like it was in Noah's day. In those days before the flood, the people were enjoying banquets and parties and Starbucks and weddings right up to the time Noah entered his boat. People didn't realize what was going to happen until the flood came and swept them all away. That is the way it will be when the Son of Man comes. Now, then there are people who are ill-prepared because they are so easily distracted. They've allowed their minds and their lives to develop in an undisciplined manner. These are good people. They do good work. They are not slackers. Two men will be working together in the field. One will be taken, the other left. Two women will be grinding flour at the mill. One will be taken, the other left. So be prepared, because you don't know what day your Lord is coming. They are not lazy people, but some of us are so into our work, or so into our families, or so into our hobbies, or so into some sport of some sort, which are all good things, by the way. They're all great things. But we're so into it that we are not ready for anything else. Good things can become a distraction from ultimate things. Good things can distract us from the ultimate things. Well, how do I know if I'm ready for the coming of the Son of Man? Interestingly enough, in Matthew 24, Jesus never tells his listeners anything specific that he wants them to do in order to get ready. Look at it. You see that he never tells them anything that he wants them to do in order to get ready. Now, of course, there's plenty that's spelled out in the rest of the Scripture that leads up to this point. It's kind of assumed that you will be caring for the poor, that you will be more into others than yourself, that you will be trusting God to provide for you, that you'll be worshiping and praying and sharing the gospel with others. And these are all important. But here in Matthew 24, in this little section that we read, Jesus is simply asking us to adopt an attitude of watchfulness and an attitude of preparedness. This is about attitude. This is about mindset. For Jesus knows that if you're maintaining an attitude of vigilance, then all the appropriate action will flow pretty naturally. So, he wants us to adopt an attitude of preparedness. And this is your assignment, especially during Advent. I was thinking back on this passage this week, and I remembered that I preached on this passage 3 months after 9/11 in 2001. And those were some stressful days in our country. There was a lot of uncertainty at that time, and there were a lot, talk about apocalyptic images, planes crashing into buildings and fire, infernos. And on Tuesday morning, September 11th, I went to Covenant Village, which is the Covenant Retirement Center, a community in Turlock, where many of our people at Cornerstone Covenant Church lived. And I went there just to hang out with people and see how they were doing through all of this crisis that was going on. And I remember that there was one woman in particular who was actually living in one of the advanced care units. She had some particular issues, but she just kept saying, not in a quiet voice, she was being very loud and vocal throughout the whole place. She was walking around, Jesus is coming, Jesus is coming, Jesus is coming back. And she was kind of stuck on this jag. And in some ways she was very confused. I mean, we were all kind of confused at that point. But I suspect that she had seen that video of the planes into the building over and over again. You know, the replay after replay that goes on as this tends to happen with these kinds of events. And if you're not catching the total flow of things, as she wasn't, you might easily think that you had seen 100 buildings wiped out by planes. And she was just very, very confused. On the other hand, though, she was really very, very on track. She was right in her thinking. Yes, Jesus is coming. He's coming back. And yes, this is our comfort, and this is our hope, and this is our assignment in order to be ready and to be prepared. Cheryl left me a note on Wednesday morning reminding me to check in and to get our boarding passes. She knows that I'm forgetful, so that was very helpful. Jesus is leaving you a note this morning. He knows that you're forgetful. He knows that you are easily distracted. He knows how easy it is for you to be unprepared. He's leaving a note this morning that says, therefore you also should be prepared because the human one will come at a time that you don't know. Additions? Comments? Maybe a word of testimony of how you've seen this at work in your own life? Maybe the pros or the cons of it, your own distractions?
I have a couple things. It's funny you should say calculating the odds. I actually thought of that this morning. I read it this morning before I came in. I was like, wow, 2,000 years? I actually did for a second. It's like, well, yeah, the odds are really not in my favor. But I guess I look at it not anywhere near opposite of what you're saying, but maybe just along the lines of that maybe it's easier than boarding a plane. Maybe it's as simple as just believing and confessing and not having to check in, not having to have a time or a date or a suitcase. But, obviously we're called to do a lot more than that.
Preparedness. Are you prepared?
Well, it seems kind of odd that we make such a big deal about when Jesus is coming back when we could be taken 2 hours from now.
Isn't that interesting?
Or less.
Yeah, I mean, I could just keel over right now. And you all know Staying Alive?
Yeah.
Okay, just checking.
Yeah.
But are we not talking about the same thing, though? Really, when you are prepared for the coming, you're also prepared for your own death. Right? I mean, it serves a dual function.
In the same line, I thought nowadays I became a pretty light traveler, and you can even bring a lotion into the plane. If you bring a lotion, you bring a Ziploc bag to show all the liquid. And I thought, what is the use to pack up? Unless we, when someday we see Jesus, we don't need anything. We don't even need any clothes.
Right, but
And I thought, so how do we pack ourselves up? It's the same thing as readiness.
yes. I'm using packing up as a metaphor
Right.
for saying, how do you be ready? I mean, you're not literally packing, I hope you're not literally packing up
Then
a
we still have to
suitcase.
pack up to be ready to another things.
What would you pack in a suitcase to be ready? You would pack faith. You would pack,
Peace, love, hope.
yeah, as well as
Charity.
and actually lived out and worked out, not just,
Right.
I could cut those things out of the Bible and stick them in a suitcase. And people tend to, oh, I've got my charity with me.
I think there's a line that says you're not supposed to do that.
I mean, if we travel, we just have the mentality that there's a place that we look forward to. The people I look forward to see.
Yeah.
You know, the activities is coming. That's what I want to do, other than holding on to
That's a
suitcase.
preparedness,
Right.
but it's a preparedness a lot that motivates us to change how we do things now in order to be ready for them.
Mhm.
I think the packaging we think is you use this metaphor is about our flu. We have to pack our flu. The flu is based on our faith and God changed us and we become patiently.
So have some
And,
fruit
yeah,
in
this
your
one-
suitcase.
Yeah, this is what I understand. What's the you flu you
What's your
gain
fruit
to
in
put
there?
in your suitcase
Sure.
and to waiting for Jesus to
Yeah,
come.
and it's not like you're earning a ticket by packing
Yeah,
your
it's not like
fruit,
that.
but that's what you, how you prepare for it. You
Yes.
take the fruit with you. Yeah, I took a lot of fruit with me when we were flying.
Have to consume all of them.
It was good. It was good. Anyone else?
I really like the metaphor.
You like the metaphor overall? You
Yeah.
give it the stamp of approval?